South Africa has taken center stage in international diplomacy this year. It will be hosting the G20 summit in November in Johannesburg, and the country is also amongst those involved in peacekeeping efforts in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Of course, one of the key issues now up for debate is what's going on with South Africa's relations with the United States. This after US President Donald Trump issued an executive order saying that it would cut aid to South Africa over land concerns. Joining me now is South Africa's International Relations and Cooperation Minister, Ronald Lamola. All right, thank you so much for joining us, Minister. You literally are fresh off the plane from Addis, where you've come from the AU summit. And South Africa will later this year be hosting the main G20 summit. One of the things that South Africa has said is that it really wants to have Africa as a central focus of the G20 summit. How will South Africa go about making sure that Africa is represented and well represented in this G20 summit?
Thank you very much indeed. I've just landed from Addis, and it was an exciting summit of the AU. We're glad that we're able to emerge with the leadership, and we wish them well to take forward the AU, and adopted a number of programs related to Agenda 2063 and the achievement of the SDGs. Indeed, we also briefed the African Union. I briefed the executive of the AU about South Africa's G20 presidency, and also the chairperson of the AU also briefed the AU about the AU's participation in the G20. As you'll be aware, the AU is now a member. And our agenda is aligned, as you are aware, in terms of the global financial architecture to be developmental in the African continent, that the bulk of the money for development must also come to the continent, because we only receive a migratory amount in terms of development. On climate change, we receive less than 3% when we are the most affected in terms of climate change. And also on the Pact of the Future that was adopted by the United Nations, there is a clear agreement in the continent, and we're looking forward to host all the G20 members here in South Africa this week, particularly the foreign ministers.
At the moment, we have a situation where America, which is one of the major players in the global north, has said that it won't attend the G20 summit. The secretary there, Marco Rubio, arguing that South Africa is, and I quote, doing some very bad things. Similar comments to being that what was made by President Trump. How is South Africa going to reach out to countries like the US or any others who are a bit reluctant to be involved in the G20 this year?
Yeah, the G20 agenda was adopted by the G20 members. It's not just South Africa. The theme we talk about, the issues we talk about, was adopted by the G20 shapers in December in South Africa, and America participated. I understand there's a change of administration, but they participated in the G20 agenda before the change of administration in December, and it was adopted by consensus by all members of the G20, what we prefer to call sufficient consensus. So it was not a unilateral agenda that we've set for the South Africa's G20 presidency.
And one of the things that President Cyril Ramaphosa mentioned during his State of the Nation address is that South Africa is going to be doing some field work, essentially, going to other countries across the world, US included, to explain the messaging around the G20. What do you think it is that people are maybe not understanding about the G20? From my understanding, it's focused on stability, equality, and sustainability this time around.
And it's in line with all the previous G20. We have just taken over the agenda from Indonesia, India, and Brazil. It's just a continuity of that agenda. And as I've already said, it's part of what was agreed upon by the shapers of the G20, but it's also in line with the UN Pact of the Future and the SDGs. And it's not just a South Africa position. The development, sustainability, resolving inequality, it's an ambition of the SDGs of the UN. And we subscribe to that. You also know our history. To us, the issue of equality, it is very important on the social and economic life of any nation.
Now, coming to the issue of equality, we've now recently seen a bit of a furore around South Africa's Expropriation Act, particularly with President Donald Trump from the United States issuing an executive order against South Africa, cutting aid, and also welcoming members of the Afrikaner community to the US as refugees, as it was stated there. Looking at how this has caused a diplomatic concern from the United States, what are the efforts that South Africa are making to actually resolve this?
Yeah, it is interference with the sovereign state. I mean, what is in the Expropriation Act is in line with universally accepted principles of reform, of redress, which is in our constitution, and it has got sufficient safeguards in terms of the process that is followed to redress the imbalances of the past. It is an open, well-known across the globe that South Africa comes from a history of racial segregation. And the segregation means that in our country as we speak, more than 80% of the land, particularly farmland, is still owned by a white minority. And the safeguards that have been put by the law are not something unique to South Africa. In the US, they have it as eminent domain. In Britain, they have it in various laws. Germany also has an expropriation law. France, there's no country that does not have an expropriation law. Even in China, they have it. And here there is sufficient safeguards to deal with this. There's no arbitrary deprivation. So we will engage with the US when the opportunity arises. We'll continue to engage with them, but we'll also engage with the whole world to give context to this reality that every state has got an instrument that enables it to expropriate in the public interest and also for public purpose, to build bridges, to build schools, but also to ensure redress in the public interest.
Well, you mentioned that many states have this. Why do you think South Africa's law has gotten this kind of attention?
It's because of misinformation. As you are aware, misinformation to the US. That is the reason, because it's baseless, it's without facts. No one can show you facts that show that since 1994, since this government took over, there has been arbitrary deprivation of land or property by this government. It has never happened. And it's clear the Constitution provides sufficient safeguards. It will be done in line with the Constitution in terms of how we do the redress. So it is misinformation. I can lay it down to that, and maybe obviously a racist agenda, because why will the executive order only target a white minority in South Africa as the people that must be given this refugee status? Because if you want to intervene in any situation where there is persecution, it should not be race-based. And in South Africa, the white Afrikaners in particular, they own the majority of the land. There is no persecution. They live in accordance with the Constitution, unless we're dealing with the issues of nostalgia, of wanting to revert back to apartheid.
You mentioned the executive order, and one other thing that's also mentioned in that executive order is South Africa's case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. We've also seen the US take some action against the staff at the ICJ, South Africa offering them sort of a safeguard here. To what extent do you think that the ICJ case has played a role in the issuing of that executive order?
Yeah, obviously it is in the executive order, so it means in the back minds of the authorities in Washington, it is an important issue. But we have not received any direct communication from Washington that this is the issue. We want you to either withdraw or do this about the ICJ. But if we do, we will stand our ground, because our basis of the ICJ case is the universally accepted principles in terms of the UN Charter, in terms of the UN positions as an organ of the United Nations, the highest judicial organ of the United Nations. We have followed all those, and we have done it in line with the established convention, the Genocide Convention. So there is no basis whatsoever to malign South Africa. If you want to argue that our case has got no merits, has got no basis, and so forth, the court is there. You can intervene, argue your point, and let the judges of the ICJ decide whether there's a case or there's no case. But we have been to court now 4 times, we have succeeded. And the court said there is plausible genocide. Allowed due process to unfold. That is how the world is built, that the principle of the rule of law must be respected by everyone. And if there's any big lesson the United States has taught to the world, is the rule of law, the Magna Carta principles, universal human rights. These are the shared values between South Africa, the United States, and many countries of the world. Universality of human rights, the principle of sacrosanct of self-determination of any nation, sovereignty, and this is the cause for the Palestinian people, the sovereignty of their country, UN resolution on a 2-state solution. These are all United Nations principles, and we have predicated our case on that basis.
Is America trying to bully South Africa?
Yes, it's obvious. On the basis of economic trade and on the basis of some of the aid that are provided to most of our NGOs and to our government. As you are aware, there is only one program, PEPFAR, that gives us almost 17% of our HIV and AIDS program. But as the South African government, we fund 83% of our own budget in terms of the fiscus. But we run the biggest HIV and AIDS program in the world. So the 17% becomes significant. But we are glad that there is a suspension on the operationalization of that. But we will not be bullied into submissions. We will stand our ground on the basis of principles. But where the US convinces us on any issue, we are available to be engaged and to engage.
And one last thing, Minister, obviously the G20 will be a big agenda item for you, but you are also kind of leading South Africa's ongoing case at the ICJ. We saw you previously as Justice Minister involved, now as Minister of International Relations. A lot of other countries have also joined that case, in a way showing their support to South Africa. When South Africa launched that case, were you expecting all these other countries and all that kind of level of support in this matter?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. Indeed, we expected that the global collective conscience of the people will arise, particularly the UN Charter, because the case is based on that, the convention, the Genocide Convention. When we launched it, we knew that it's going to be difficult, particularly the vilification and so forth from the global community. And you will remember that it was also not broadcast in a number of international platforms. Maybe it was with the exception of Al Jazeera. But we think that case helped conscientize the people of the world out of the Israel propaganda that their process was only to respond to Hamas. It became clear that this is aimed to as a collective punishment of the people of Palestine as a group, and the court found that can't be done and occupy. So we are glad that many countries have now come in support of this process. It is necessary that all of humanity protect the rule of law, because the rule of law guarantees the future of everyone, an international-based rule of law system. So we are very glad that that is happening, and there is this support by all these countries. And we are looking forward to the merits of the case, and obviously the processes of the courts will have to take a life of its own, which is currently unfolding.
All right. Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your time. We appreciate that you made so much time for us today.